Hello and welcome to another Hasselblad webinar. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you're all keeping safe in these tough times and looking forward to spending the next hour with us. I'm Mark Whitney, part of Hasselblad's European marketing team, and I'm keeping safe and following government guidelines by coming to you today from my home in the UK. Today's webinar will be an interview with photography duo Cooper and Gorfer, users of the Hasselblad H6D and X1D camera systems, and we'll be talking about their concept of portraiture, why they use Hasselblad, and having a look at one of their recent projects with a sneak behind the scenes. So just to go through a few slides before we meet Sarah and Nina. So just to let everyone know that today's webinar is being recorded. So if anyone would like to watch it back or any of our past webinars that we've done over recent months, look at the Hasselblad YouTube channel, and they're all listed on there. Today's webinar will be recorded and posted up either later this evening or worst case tomorrow morning, hopefully. And you'll all get an email as well to give you the link as well. So yeah, have a look on there. And also just to mention a bit of Hasselblad news, yesterday we launched our new Masters competition for 2021. So please go to our website for all the rules and the regulations, and the closing date is the 31st of July. So hopefully you'll all be inspired to enter, and good luck. And to help with that, we've got another webinar on the 29th of April. We've got a Masters panel of 4 previous winners, all to give advice and tips on how they won the competition, which may be of use for your own entry. So what does it take to become a Hasselblad Master? That's another webinar we're doing on the 29th of April, and you can sign up for that on our website. So just a quick agenda for today, quite simple and basic. Introduction to Cooper and Gorfer. Then we're going to talk about a bit about their concept of portraiture and the constructed image. Then very briefly, why Hasselblad, why they use the cameras they use. And then we're going to take a look at one of their projects, so Between These Folded Walls, Utopia. As usual, we're expecting this to be around about 50 minutes in length, which will leave us a little bit of time in the end for some questions and answers. So feel free to submit any questions you've got using the GoToWebinar control panel. Any questions that are relevant to the talk during the discussion, we can try and squeeze in. Or as I say, if not at the end, we've got a general question and answer session where we can ask any remaining ones there. And we'll try to squeeze in as many as possible. So, Sarah and Nina, are you there?
I did it. Here I am.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, how's it going?
It's good. Thank you.
Yeah. So just to let everyone know, so Sarah and Nina, where are you? We'll start with Sarah. Where are you based at the moment?
I'm in Sweden, but I'm in Stockholm, so I'm on the East Coast.
Okay, and Nina, you're Gothenburg, is that right?
Gothenburg, exactly. Hasselblad's home base.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, been there a few times.
Beautiful, isn't
it? Yeah. Okay, so let's have an introduction to you. So obviously Cooper and Gorfer is named after yourselves. Tell us a little bit how you met and formed a collaboration for your business.
I guess I can start. Nina and I we're not Swedish. We're not from Sweden, but we both gravitated to Sweden in our 20s, and I ended up meeting Nina because we ended up going to grad school. So we met in grad school studying design at a university in Gothenburg. And we started off as really good friends. I think also this kind of expat, you end up bonding with people that are maybe the foreigners in the class. And we ended up creating a friendship, but also we realized a lot of our sort of aesthetics and ideas and concepts were very similar. We both had also had careers before we went to grad school. So I think that when we decided to work together and do our master's thesis together, we had this sort of baggage of expertise where I had come from more classical photography, whereas Nina had come more from architecture and graphic design. And so we put all of these things together, and it created this sort of hybrid style that we have today. And I think because we also met at a time when it was, photography had switched over more to digital. It made it so that the way that we approach the work and approach this medium of photography was more as a tool and not necessarily as photographers. So it was more our tool for creating art, but it wasn't necessarily, we didn't approach it from this classical standpoint. It was more a product for design. And yeah, we did the thesis together, and we've been working together for about 15 years, over 15 years now.
Okay, and Nina, what is the sort of the basis of your work? What sort of messages do you like to try and get across with your projects?
Well, like Sarah just said, we come from like different backgrounds, and this, like what you mentioned also, that the photography is just like just a tool. Maybe it is our tool, but not in a classic sense. So we see ourselves very much as collectors. And when we started our collaboration, it was really important. It was actually our first kind of project together, work together, was a book. So we were extreme. That was around the time 2004 or 5. So we were extremely into visual storytelling. How can we kind of narrate a story without any text, but also not just with like a storyboard, but also this kind of like exploring all the different aspects of the image. It can be like flat textures, or to kind of like photograph pages of a book if you want to say something. So we really went into that, and we created this like 400-page book together that's based on stories we had collected in Iceland. So I would say, to answer your question, our starting point there was very much trying to combine travel, the aspect that interested us in like traveling, experiencing new cultures, and also this like storytelling that we were really interested in, visual storytelling. This is still kind of like the base of our work, although it has kind of course, from there, it evolved. It has evolved, and it has kind of gotten many more aspects, and we became very much interested in this. Like Sarah said, we come from different backgrounds. We both ended up in Sweden, and so identity for us still plays a huge role in our work. Both like, where do we come from and how are we influenced by this kind of cultural environment that influences us so much where we grow up, and that doesn't need to be necessarily like a national environment, but also like cultural environment of like, as in like subcultural, what are you surrounded by? It can be musical culture, or like your, I don't know, your interest base. And specifically nowadays with the internet, it's so globalized. So I think we are part of so many different cultures, every one of us. And this kind of like is a starting point of how do we express that in an image, in a photograph.
Okay, so we've got your web details and your social media there for people that would like to see a little bit more of your work after the webinar, and we'll repeat that again at the end if you miss it and don't manage to take it down. So we've got here that you're known for your distinct hybrid portraits, and we've got a slide here which shows sort of just a little bit sort of behind the scenes, really. Yeah, so tell us a little bit about that and sort of how you go about your work and your projects.
Well, like Nina said, so we basically, when we started, we decided we'd have this concept of no ownership. So you'll see both of us picking up the camera. We're basically, we educated ourselves in everything that we knew. So in that way, I would say for the first half of our career, each one of us was literally capable of doing the exact same thing of the other person. And we, in every single image we did and every single project we did, you could say we touched everything. And now I think we divide things up more, but in that way, so that was sort of just how we work. So we have a very small team. It's just Nina and I. And when we need to do bigger productions, then we bring in people. But overall, it's just her and I. And our rule in the beginning was whatever we can carry on our back. That's what we had with us on our travels. In the beginning was also about this idea of how place is connected to memory, and how to illustrate that. And we were very inspired by this idea of the crevices of history, because memory can be so deceptive. Often the history that is told is all dependent on who held the power. And so for us, it was about kind of trying to recreate a place based on the collective memory and the interviews that we would conduct in the location. So about 50% of our work was often without the camera. It was just sitting and listening and asking and having these interviews to try and sort of piece together how people remember a place. And then we would then photograph people based on what we were told during the time, and do this almost like spontaneous theater. So we had a project called My Quiet of Gold, where we had traveled to Kyrgyzstan. And I think this was sort of when we really coined our style. It was a place that is known for its oral history, where they didn't use the Cyrillic alphabet until the turn of the century. And they also used the oral history as a way to sort of being under the Soviet Union, there was a lot of discrepancy with certain genocides and things that had happened. And it made it so that they could tell their history through the undercover veil of a story. And so we would basically, we collected most of our stories at the very beginning, and then the rest of the trip was just spontaneous theater, where we would have people reenact their tales in front of the camera. And I just wanted to add that our work is, it's all about being kind of true to the visual arc of a person's life, but at the same time, it's very staged. You know, it's very rare that we just see someone on the street or that we just photograph them right there. It's all about sort of planning and having them come to the shooting. Often we would ask people to bring garments or heirlooms or things that represent themselves, so that they can then sort of act in our photograph. Because we notice that, you know, people like myself are very uncomfortable in front of the camera. So if you give them a persona, which often is themselves, we felt that this was a wonderful way that we could create a truer image.
Okay. So Nina, this is an example of some of your work. Now, this is before you started using Hasselblad.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if you're able to tell us, you know, a little bit more about this image, and then some of the reasons why you then moved to start using Hasselblad.
Sure. So this is an image, and Sarah has like already beautifully mentioned our trip to Kyrgyzstan. This is an image from Kyrgyzstan. It's called Shola and the Cat. And here you see, I mean, here really like you said, Sarah, you see really like the style that we then later on like really worked with for the past 10 years, where it's photographic, but it's not really. It's very collaged. It's very like painterly. We kind of deconstruct the image. We put in parts together. And the reason why we do this is, as I have mentioned before, we are made out of so many kind of kaleidoscopic parts in our lives. It can be memories. It can be like a part that was imposed onto us that we sometimes feel when we just, and I say this on the, you know, like I think, take a picture of the person, we cannot really convey that, or at least Sarah and I in our artistic career felt like we wanted to get in more symbolism, we wanted to be maybe a bit more raw with like how we handle the picture and be true to the person, but not be true to the image, if that makes sense. So in this way, you know, she's kind of half vanishing. You also feel like this like thing coming out. It's a bit like her on her neck, that's a bit like violence almost, but it's also a bit of kind of like a jewelry aspect. And like her life, just to like give a little bit of behind the scenes from that, not without going too far, it was like Kyrgyzstan has this huge tradition of bridal kidnapping, so you can just be like taken from the street as a woman, as a young woman, and then you have to marry the man who kidnaps you. So 80% of all the women we met in Kyrgyzstan had been kidnapped into wedlock, as into the marriage. And Shola was the only one who had actually there to leave her husband. So this picture kind of symbolizes both that she was still very, she couldn't work, you know, she was like socially shunned, but it also conveys some kind of strength and power, but also a little bit like the suffering. There was like the Frida Kahlo aspect to that as well. And so I would say kind of like all these aspects together in one image, also the cultural aspects floating in there. we then exhibited this whole series, and here we come to the Hasselblad issue, the beauty, the Hasselblad beauty, and that was that we got really disappointed, of course, in the quality. The image before was shot with like an older Canon camera, which I don't want to diss Canon, but it was like a small format camera, and one of the first digital ones. And then we said, no, we want to go big. And we wanted to go bigger in scale, which we still work with a lot, and you see that in the next slide, I think. But we started to work then with the collaboration with Hasselblad, and here you can see like what it allows us to do. And these images are 2 meters by 150, and the restrictions isn't the camera anymore. The restriction is the frame, the glassing, the frame. Like, does it go through openings? You know, does it fit the elevator of the lab and things like that to transport? And I mean, this is just such, it has really allowed us to work so much more freely. We can, of course, still work small, you know, produce like small images, which we also do sometimes to kind of like create a little bit more of this dance in size for the exhibitions, but we can go as big as we want, we feel, with this camera. And we work a lot with the HD6 for these exhibitions. And we also have the X1D, as you see here, which we use a lot for, you know, like the collective part, the collector's part of our work that we still work with a lot. And so the small camera, the X1D, that really allows us that even if we aren't working in field on a project, we can have it with us at all times. And so it's really good for us to just be spontaneous and to just like, you know, if we are on a personal travel, maybe we see something, we get inspired, or we see like an element that we need to capture. So this is like our collecting camera.
Yeah, and I guess the look and the feel of both files can then be merged together in your constructed image. So
Exactly. So we can use a lot of the parts. We usually create these like huge libraries that we then draw from. We have also, I mean, with the X1D, like, it's not just this collector, you know, I mean, it's great for that, but I mean, if we would see somebody who we really want to photograph, we could also do that without problem. So kind of allows us to be, you know, it's small, it's handy. It may not be the best like sport photography camera. It's not very, you know, it's difficult maybe with the sensor they're reacting, but I think that it's for our, you know, portraiture, still portraiture, it's just great.
Okay, so a lot of people usually ask what lenses you use. So just to mention that for the H camera, you use the 35mm and the 80mm, and then for the X1D, you have the 45 and the 90. So you obviously find yourself varying which lenses you use depending on the shoot.
Exactly. Yeah. If we're doing portraiture, we go for the 80 and the 90. And if it's more like this thing that Nina talked about, that we are collectors, if it's more for overall collecting, then I think the 45 on the X1D is just fantastic. Like, I think if I have to choose, I normally use the 45, whereas we tend to keep the portraiture more with the H system. But like Nina said, you know, I think we have used the X1D. We shot half of the project we're going to tell you about soon with the X1D. So yeah.
Okay, well, let's get to the project. So this is a bit of a description. So Nina, would you like to tell us a little bit more about the project before we start to see the images?
Sure. So Sarah and I usually, before we start a project, and this is also a question we get quite often, like how long do these images, just like a series of work take? And we usually work between like 2 to 4 years on like one series and one body of work. And before we go into the work, we like to start with like a workshop together, just Sarah and I, and we usually also like, which I think is, I don't know, I'm saying it because I think it's interesting that we need this kind of space where we're a bit away from our normal lives. So we usually go to like a place that we kind of find exciting at the time. For this project, we went to Mallorca and we just like hung out on a little finca for like 2 weeks, and we discussed things. And because I think it's interesting how like you feel like you want to start a new body of work in general, and also then figuring out like where to start and what are you interested about. And for us in our career, we've kind of learned how to trust our intuition there. And so we start with just being also in kind of a non-performance space together, where we can just talk and see what's influencing us at the time. And so for this project, what was going in the world was obviously influencing us, and that was 2015 was the migration crisis in Europe. And so that was obviously a huge thing. And at the same time, then I had like read an article in the German newspaper called Decisive about that we as a society are losing kind of our dreams. The article was called something like The Loss of Utopia. And I found it really interesting in a time where it was really so many like challenges. And I mean, we didn't know the pandemic was coming up at the time, but it was like, it felt like this huge, like turmoil in the world. And at the same time, then this article that kind of also I resonated with, it's true, am I thinking about like a utopia, how like a perfect world could look? Because it's always connected to a little bit of kind of, you don't do that, that's passé, that's gone. We have tried it and it didn't work, so let's just move on with the way how things are. But so in that way, kind of like diving into this and questioning for ourselves, like what happens if we don't think about like new utopias, and what does utopia even mean, and where does it come from? And interestingly enough, utopia means no place. So the original meaning of the word is like, it's no place, and it comes from Greek, and so you can, and why couldn't we achieve it? Why did it fail? Why did we fail so badly at it? And if you look at it, I mean, it's actually pretty obvious. And I mean, we've always tried to create it in the outside, right? With systems. This is how we are as a society. We love to think in systems. We love to categorize, and then we also love to obviously try to build it, impose it onto ourselves, or make it possible. But in the end, it's anyways an imposition. So it's been political systems gone bad, gone rogue, and built in the environment, architecture, also like giant utopian architectural visions created that didn't really work out so well. But so in the end, also there is like, this is our culture, we also look at into just like how we had seen, our culture in the West, I say like ours, where we had come from, our culture has tried to create utopian dreams. And but there are also a lot of other cultures, and looking into maybe more like an Eastern standpoint, it's more like they look within. It's basically nirvana. So it's also this like two kind of like opposing almost systems, where it's a clash, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a clash. And so in that way, we kind of like started to think about utopia. We also started to think about the migration crisis. And we began to formulate the project along those lines.
Okay, and then this is the image we've been using to advertise the webinar, so titled Anonymous Landscape. So Sarah, are you able to tell us a little bit behind the scenes on this?
Yeah, this is one of the images that actually was towards the end of our project. I think the next slide is more about the protagonist, but this is maybe a little bit off of the protagonist that actually dominated the project. So this is kind of a typical of our work is we're known very much for our portraitures and these very Amazonian giant images of these women that as you saw the size of our images, they have a very dominating quality to them. And then there's a lot of images that happen on the side, textures, things that we end up creating that are a little bit off. And in this project, we had this idea of, as Nina mentioned, this concept of no place. So we didn't travel really anywhere. We traveled more to collect, but we didn't, in the end, actually shoot in an actual location. So we ended up creating these sort of worlds that were based on this idea of kind of this more Western concept of the built environment, where we were traveling to. You'll see some slides later. but also this idea from our protagonists, also their own memories and everything, and then our own concept. And we created these very much like stage sets. And this image is very much an homage to the helpers, this idea of these very anonymous characters that are building and scrambling away, trying to create this miraculous world, this fantasy that is completely unattainable and normally deemed as ridiculous. This is an image that also kind of tips over probably into our next project, because we've noticed that we do work project to project, but we have had these experiences where some of the ideas are sort of stretching beyond the actual theme of the project. And because we work so intuitively, and it is very much based on a gut instinct, it makes it so that we kind of go with it, even though it might be like dwindling on being off theme. So this is kind of the end of Utopia going into our next project, which is actually about hysteria.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the protagonist. So this is the image.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Yeah. So so at the time when what Nina sort of described the environment of where we were, 2016, 2017, we had just finished our last project. And we had met a friend of ours who is a teacher. And at the time she was a teacher of young migrants who were coming to Sweden and being educated in Swedish, and just some of them coming alone, some of them with their families. And she was on that particular day completely torn apart emotionally. And it was because a lot of her students were in this limbo state where they were about to be turning 18 and they were subject to possible deportation. And she wasn't able to help them, and it was creating a huge anxiety in the class. And also this idea of, educating yourself or becoming a part of a new culture, but then suddenly having that dream, or maybe not dream, taken away from you. And then and there, we also noticed how dislocated we were to our own city, our own country that we were living in. You live in your little bubbles in your neighborhoods, and I think a lot of the trauma of the world is seen on a screen, and or the enlightenment of the world is also seen on a screen. And so we decided that we wanted to illuminate young women whose lives have been touched by forced migration. So it was we worked with young women between the age of 16 and 24. Some of them were refugees who had come, within the last emigration wave. Some were from Somalia, Afghanistan, coming through Iran, Syria. But then we also were working with women who were maybe second generation, whose parents have done that journey, who were dealing with totally different identity issues. And I think for us, it was a process that took quite some time to find everyone, like most of the people we met through schools. And then I think I'm going to let Nina continue before I keep blabbing. Yeah.
Yeah, so we got some sort of behind the scenes shots from the actual project. So with regard to the people that feature in your images, how do you go about identifying those people and asking them to take part? Is that a difficult thing to do, or are people very willing to take part and to help you tell their story?
I think for us, it's like Sarah said, we kind of always try to find an in. This time we found an in through the teacher we knew who taught in the school, who got us in contact with other teachers at other schools. So kind of like started small, but it became like a bigger network. And when we try to find people, I mean, it's a very intuitive process there as well. Some people are immediately like for it and they're up for it. Others maybe are a little bit more withdrawn, but we know who we want to photograph also. So it's we don't go like in the class and ask who wants to be part of this project. So we usually present, and then we maybe approach the people we think would work for us. And from there also, you know, some people, it becomes very obvious that they aren't into it, or in this case it was also young women who just have come. Many of them have just come to Sweden recently, and you don't know really what's going on in their like personal life, or did they come with the family, do they have like cultural restrictions and so on. So I think specifically this project had to be very like how to say careful or attentive, maybe more. And also take a no for a no. But the people we then, the women who we did work with, they were all, you know, then like we start like a bigger process. So we also ask a lot of them, basically time-wise, also share your life story. I mean, this is also not just like, can I take your picture? They also, you know, we do want them to share, and so they have to be also open that this information then will become public in one way or the other. And we always try to be really clear with them, also try to always asking, is there any aspect you don't want us to say, or you don't want us to like incorporate that's important to you? So maybe we still incorporate it in the image, but we don't like push it. So we try to be true to the story, but we also try to be very respectful of the women we work with.
Okay, and another behind the scenes image here. So this sort of shows what you know, how far you go to create the sets, really. So you know, how long would it take you to construct something like this? Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, this went pretty fast. I mean, as you can, the sets in the end go quite quickly, but the elements to create the set take forever. So I think for this, we had been gathering tons of footage that we had photographed. I wanted to add that we also worked with some 3D simulators, architects who do 3D simulations to create some architecture for us as well. So we would basically print all of our material out. And in this case, this one's called Isra's City. We would then intuitively construct structures. So this is just one of many structures. They're also ephemeral. So we would make them, then we'd rip them apart, rebuild them again. So it was this constant process of photographing the process of constructing, tearing down, rebuilding, constructing, tearing down, like this. And then also this idea that we would you know, the image itself, we would rephotograph as well over and over and over again. So our images, you know, that when you see them in the end, they're incredibly three-dimensional, even though they are a flat printed print, but it's us sort of photographing the deconstruction of the image itself and the person themselves. But you could say it's, back to your question, it takes forever, and then when you finally know what you're doing, it's very quick. But up until that point, I think you don't really know what you're making.
Okay, so Nina, like Sarah just mentioned there, that there's a 3D sort of look and feel to the backgrounds, and we've got a question from Bernardus. He's saying that it reminds him of sort of like origami. Do you see that, or is that something you're inspired by with the backgrounds?
Not maybe specifically origami, but I mean, it's paper fold. That's very close to origami, but it's not just one paper. It's made out of many different pieces. It would have been a bit complicated otherwise. But we love this. What we wanted to achieve was this kind of like illusion of a three-dimensional space. This one here, specifically the picture you show here, it's kind of three-dimensional, but it's also flat, and it's also very kind of like stacked on top of each other and abstract, but it still resembles a city, right? So I think our like whole inspiration here, or in general with this like setup, was to, since all the girls that were young women we worked with carry with them kind of different places that they have either grown up in or their parents have grown up in, because we also work with second generation migrants. So you kind of carry with you parts of cultures, parts of places, maybe you're just memories, and that you never, that don't really exist in the environment you're living at this moment in time. And so that's like the whole reason why we went that far with the construction, is we wanted to somehow show it, but since it's always just like a memory, and memories get changed over time, and they get like intensified or changed or taken, a part of it gets taken away, so it becomes this kind of dream-like environment. And we wanted to it wasn't about, like Sarah said, we worked with a 3D architect as well. It wasn't about recreating the exact environment they described to us. It was more about, you should see as a viewer that this is like a coulisses, it's like a theater background, rather than like us trying to like perfectly illustrate, how Damascus looked in their memory, and I think it's impossible anyways. But so we wanted to give that like this kind of shifting nature of your memory, shifting nature of the places you grew up in, and like they're changing, and so are you. But like, yeah, so in that way, I think paper allowed us to work quickly. It allowed us to print on it, so it's all photographed, reprinted, it's a photograph, and then rephotographed, like worked with and then rephotographed.
Okay, and then we've got an example here with an exhibition for the project, and you can see there that there's an actual photographic background to the wall as well. So tell us a little bit more about that, Sarah.
Yeah, I think for us, we were creating these fictitious worlds in order for the women to kind of act in, because also just wanted to point out the women themselves, they are playing themselves, but at the same time we also had them sort of reenact themselves as this avatarian version of themselves. So in that way, nothing is of this time. At the same time, it's every time, you could say, and also that sort of no culture alone can create the valid recipe for everything. It's this hybrid of a million things, and so in that way, all of the women are themselves, but they're actors in a story of a higher version of themselves, you could say. And so when we did the exhibition, we wanted the viewer to also kind of be a part of this trompe l'oeil, that you as the viewer would also be entrapped in the world itself. And so for us, when we realized we could print and create wallpaper, it enabled us to create a closed environment constructed by a lot of these sort of side images that I mentioned before. We're known so much for the portraits, but there's so much other work that comes out of our project that is the constructed material around the image itself. And so New York was a tiny space, and as a result, we decided to enclose ourselves even more. So we created this sort of labyrinthian wallpaper where the constructed background and then the image itself is hung on the background, and then you are inside this space watching them, watching you, kind of thing. And it was really interesting. It was the first time we'd worked that way, and this project specifically lended itself to that.
Okay, we've got a question from Dale. Do you also use analog and film in your work at all, or have you done in the past? Nina?
Well, the first project we did in Iceland, we had a giant Mamiya with us as well, where we photographed on film. But then we realized it was all about cutting the images up, and you needed to scan them in anyways. And so our kind of work approach and how we work, our method is really much easier with digital, since it will all be going through the computer in one way or another. But we have worked with analog, we tried, but we don't work with it anymore. And with film, I'm guessing he means just like film, not like moving image. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the same answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and with your projects, do you tend to just work on one at a time, concentrate on one project, or do you also have like projects running simultaneously? Sarah?
We normally work on one project at a time. but it can be interrupted where another project will come in or another opportunity will come in. So we've had circumstances where, you know, it depends. Some like this project and the project before this one, you know, they're self-financed. They take forever. They normally are finished when we find a deadline, for example, an exhibition or a way to premiere it. So we tend to work the projects to death until we get the deadline that will then finish it for us, you could say. But then, you know, circumstances will happen. We've had the wonderful opportunity to have what do you call it? To be hired to do artworks as well, to have commissioned works. And you know, when the money calls, there are times when you have to interrupt these self-finance projects in order to refinance yourself so you can finish the art itself. So unfortunately and fortunately, it can be a money issue where we'll switch over to another project, or it's just that maybe we need a break. You know, I think this project, you know, it started it, what is it, 2017 officially started it, but we were thinking about it even earlier than that. And ended it in 2020. The project before that, it took us 7 years, you know, and it's interesting how the time can also lend itself to having a more interesting critical eye on the work as well.
Yeah. And Nina, so the balance between your sort of personal projects and commissioned work, I assume that you prefer to tell your own stories. Do you find the commission work sometimes a little bit limiting and having to work within someone else's brief? What's the preference there?
I mean, when we started to work together, we've worked a lot more with commission work or simply commercial work. And there we quickly felt that people wanted our expression, visual expression, but just not all the way. And that was difficult for us. That was really difficult to find that fine line. You know, just do what you do, but can she smile and can there be a blue sky? And like, it depends on what kind of commissions it was, but we kind of, and I'm exaggerating, but so that was a bit difficult. But then, you know, later on, and as we started to be more established as artists and in our own work, and like it became a bit like more self-carrying, also financially, and so we weren't really dependent so much on the commercial work or commissioned work. And then, interestingly enough, really good commissioned work started to appear. So we were really commissioned to do exactly what we do, basically like. There was one series we even turned into like one of our own series. Actually, two of our series, two of our bodies of work have started with like a commission. And so it can be like a crossover and start as one but end as the other. And I think that's also the most important and the most successful in many ways, where all parts are the most satisfied in the end with the result as well. So in a way, I think we are just like weary of what is it for. It's of course easy if it's for like some like cultural maybe background or something that in itself is kind of an art, has an art approach, and not maybe too much of like a commercial branding or something like that. But, you know, I mean, I'm saying that now and then tomorrow, I don't know, and a really interesting client calls, you're like, yes, that sounds like a great idea. I think it's really intuitive and we really don't want to like rule anything out, but we're also wary of like taking on things where we're not completely sure that will be a good match.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess, you know, there's obviously a lot more to your work than just pressing the shutter button on the camera, and that's what your commissioned clients are booking you for your, you know, your style and your, you know, your way of thinking on the images. So Sarah, you mentioned that your projects tend to finish when they're sort of like a natural goal or like an exhibition or a book. Typically, how many images do you have in a project before you get to that sort of stage? Does it vary?
Yeah, we have had everything from around, I think, 35 images, final images, to what, 75, Nina, something like that, 75 images, yeah. even more. Yeah. So we had this one project that we finished in 2017 called I Know Not These My Hands. That's the one that took 7 years to finish. That was just huge. I mean, that was like yeah, that was a giant book, and yeah, 75 images. Very, it was almost like a thesis about, it wasn't just the images themselves, it was all these bizarre side images. It was kind of like a diary of our time. And this project now, what is it, like 45 images, something like that. So it varies, you know, and it's not to say that always more is more, you know. Sometimes I think maybe our weakness is editing, you know, how to really choose the essence of what was the best work from that time. I mean, maybe later on in our careers we will have less work, who knows. But I think the abundance for us is also our working method. We create an enormous amount of work in our, when we do projects, and it's just part of it. It's the way that you get from one place to another. You have to fail and do a million other images in order to do this image that you see here. So it's very hard to do those amazing images by just doing those specific images. You have to do a lot of other stuff. Yeah.
Okay, and we got a question from Shantanu, Nina. Do you do a lot of work in post-production, or is it mostly in camera?
No, we do, since, you know, you've seen, like in the very beginning, this first image I talked about, which was the woman and the cat. That's where we started really to go into collage. So that's where we started to like cut out things and destroy the image. So that's being said, we do print out the picture, we cut it, we rephotograph it, but we also, of course, do like sketches, definitely on the computer, like how shall it look, how is the composition, and like the final work, the final touches, also definitely on the computer. So post-production, yeah, it's a very heavy, very big part of our work. It's like to get everything together and like get the composition right, get all the elements in. And it's kind of like this small spurts of analog, you know, printing and collage technique, the sewing, stitching. So it's a blend, but it comes together on the computer. And since we all, you know, like I said before, wanted to bring in all these elements we have collected in camera, for us is difficult. We have done this also, and some images are more in camera, but a lot of images, and we usually show it. You usually see that there are cuts and lines, and it's collaged, and yeah. So.
We have done in camera recently. We did do some stuff in camera, which was also really interesting to do it all in camera. Yeah.
Yeah. So I suppose an image like this would be mainly in camera, would it? The envious bodies.
This is also the blend. You know, we shot them in this kind of green screen like environment, but and then we ended up constructing the world, and then again, like taking the one image, cutting it out, putting the other one. So this one is also this idea of assembling them within the assembled world. So it's like, yeah, it's basically going back and forth between having it in the computer, printing it out, taking it apart, rephotographing it, putting it back in the computer again. And it's not that we knew that this was going to look like this. I think a lot of the work, we have no idea what it's really going to look like in the end. And it's a process to know when it's finished also. And I think that's also been interesting with us being two. It's a very good, what do you call it? It's a very good way of handling criticism, where like if it goes through both of our filters, then it normally is gonna make it. Normally it has some quality to it.
Okay, Nina, we've had a question, the same question from both Nuno and John. Are there any other artists that you take inspiration from, that have inspired you, and that you look to for inspiration?
Oh, this is always, I have such a hard time with this question. It's a very good question, but I'm really bad at names. And I have to say, me personally, I don't really look at other photographers. I might be inspired by maybe, you know, certain kind of lighting or painting, a lot of also abstract painting, color ranges. a movie, you know, like picking it from different mediums also. But I don't think there's like this one photographer or artist that I can name now that's like this as a huge inspiration. I think it's more like different elements from different kinds of, yeah, like could be a movie, or it could be paintings, or yeah, different medium.
What about you, Sarah? Is it the same as Nina, or have you got?
It changes all the time, because like right now, right, like this instant, I'm really into David Hockney and I'm into Barber rugs. You know, it has nothing to do with photography really. When we first met, Vermeer, we were completely obsessed with Vermeer. It was more about the light. We wanted to replicate his light. It changes, you know. It often is not necessarily that the thing you're inspired by is a replica of what you're going to create. Maybe it's a color palette. You're like, I love the colors in that, and it could even be like a house, or maybe it could be something visual that maybe that you're very enamored of, that you end up wanting to take into your work. So it's changing all the time. So sometimes you're almost embarrassed by the things you were inspired by before, because you're like, but I'm not inspired by that now. It has nothing to do with me. And so therefore you're kind of are disregarded. So it's a real like process. It's like music, you know. I think you have your favorites, but then, you know, there's something else that has attracted you, and then you're disgusted by something that you liked when you were 16. I don't know. Some people are very nostalgic and stick to it. But also literature is a huge inspiration for us also. I know Nina's very fond of poetry. I can get lost in like the great novel. So that often also can bring, I think it's more how poetry or literature can ignite the imagination and create scenes for you, or ideas, or gives you a sense of feeling that maybe you want the image to feel. You want the image to feel loved, or you know, this kind of emotions that you can get from music or from literature is often something we like our image to also feel like something, to make it sing, or to create an emotional reaction in the viewer.
Okay. A question on this actual image that we've got up from Teresa. Were the models shot separately or composited together?
No, here we actually work with a group of dancers from the Gothenburg Opera. It's a really, really good dance company. And so we chose a couple of girls, and we had a whole session with them. We also did like a moving artwork, like where we filmed them. And then we did a separate one where we just was about photographing. And it was just amazing to work with them, because of course, like dancers, and they really know their body, and it was actually really fun. It was also easy to direct them. I was very proud. I'm like, what a great directors we are. But I mean, of course, they just move perfectly, and everything looks perfect all the time. So that was a huge, joy. Yeah, here it is. Great. Yeah. So this is the, we did like a video projection, and we also exhibited it in New York now, quite big on the wall. It's kind of a loop, a 9-minute loop where the dancers move in different positions, and we had an animator help us making these like ghostly shadows, as you see here, where it actually becomes kind of impressionist, you know, and then at other times it becomes really still. So I think when we worked with this was our first moving image work. And there you can still see that we're influenced by paintings, and like every little like frame had to be like also great as a still image, we thought. Yeah, that was fun.
Okay, so we're getting to the end of the images now. Just before we wrap up, so you mentioned the book for the Utopia project, so that's coming soon, I believe, Sarah?
That's going to come in September. Like the 22nd or something like that of September will be the book launch. And we are going to have the show in Stockholm at Fotografiska. So basically the book will be launched, and then we'll launch the show in Stockholm. So it's not out soon, but it's going to be out in early autumn.
Okay, and then you've also got some videos that people could see if they visit your website as well, and some video productions you've put together. Yeah, do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Really maybe the one that you see here, the video here, that's about the Utopia projects. I mean, I would recommend going and looking at it. It's 15 minutes, and you really, it's kind of important to us always to, speaking of like also how, I mean, a lot of times you get the question, what do we give back, or what you know, how do we involve, how do we work with the people we work with? And this is, you usually do books because of it, because we want to also tell the story behind people and give like credit somehow. And with just images sometimes and exhibitions, this is hard to accomplish. And with the documentary that we did here, and we also did it in previous projects, that's also a great platform to also give the audience a little bit more of information. Here in this film, you can hear some of the girls talk about their own like struggles and like thought processes and like stories behind. So that this is not about us. This is also not behind the scenes of the project as much as it is about really hearing the stories and still getting kind of like the emotion of the project across.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a bit of like a kind of these personal reflections, a bit of a manifesto from each of the girls. It's on our website, actually. You can see it under films. We just put it up, so you can go into our website under films and watch it. And again, with what Nina said about the films and the book, you know, the book and the films is an opportunity for us to show things that are not necessarily just the artwork. So it's a chance where you get to hear the voice often of our protagonist and the stories behind. You can really nerd out on what you maybe think the images mean or what they have meant to others. Which is quite nice, you know. The book and films are the only time where we can have that opportunity, because the rest becomes so more visual, you know. It tends to be privy to the restrictions of a gallery or a museum where it's not as pedagogic. It's more about like this great image. And so I think it's if you are interested and want to take the time, the books it's wonderful. I think you get to see a lot where we're coming from.
Okay, and then we've got your web details and social media on the screen again. If people want to go to your website, that's where to find you. And hopefully we'll be able to all come to Stockholm for the exhibition, all being well with the pandemic and travel and all that sort of thing. So hopefully I'll get to see you then in person this time. So coming to the end of the webinar. So thank you very much to Sarah and Nina. Thanks for taking the time and sharing your stories and work with us. And as I say, hopefully we'll get to see you soon.
Thank you.
Very much.
Good.
So just to quickly finish off, just got a few slides. So the next webinar we're doing is a week today with David Stanbury. He's a UK wedding photographer that incorporates Hasselblad into his wedding day workflow. So hopefully you'll join us for that. We've also got a quick webinar survey that pops up after you leave the webinar. If you could fill that in for us, that'd be much appreciated. Helps us to know what we're doing well, what we're not doing well, and what sort of topics and other photographers you would like us to feature. So that's all very good feedback for us. Another reminder that our past webinars are on our YouTube channel, and a recording from today will be posted up either later this evening or worst case tomorrow morning, so you'll be able to watch it back. And then finally, for any more information on Hasselblad, of course, our website at hasselblad.com. So all our other webinars are on there if you'd like to join us for any others. Lots of information on our products, of course, our partner network around the world, lots of inspirational stories, lots on our history. And then, of course, you can request a demo of any cameras you'd like to try and get any support. Yeah, so thanks once again to Sarah and Nina, and hopefully see you again on the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.